So, for those of you not familiar with who I am, I'm Harness Graysick. I've been doing a talk called APIs and You because I'm not a creative person when it comes to title names. Past few months I've been more or less just going over slides and talking about various best practices on building the API, but since one, I kind of got tired of dealing with PowerPoint, and two, I figured coding would be nice sooner or later. This month we're going to actually do some code, and some of the stuff I've been doing for the subs setup is actually newer to me than how I usually do things. So, excuse me. I'm thinking what we're going to go over is writing some, but not all, tests for the API first, just to kind of get a little bit of that TDD going. I don't necessarily agree that you need to write tests all the time, but I just wanted to show off a new tool that I've been using recently called Codeception, which I had Terry and quite a few people tell me, oh yeah, it's really cool, it's really cool. I was like, oh yeah, I'll get around to trying it, and then never did. But I finally started using it for a project at work and realized, oh wow, this is actually pretty helpful. I think it was last month, or maybe it was the month before, I lost track, that I talked about testing and the tool that I recommended using for API stuff, besides PHP unit if you want to just do unit test against the repository design, is Bhat, which is a nice BDD tool. Basically, allows you to write tests of just saying, when I hit this endpoint on the API, I expect to see the following data, and if I hit it with this bad request, I should see the following thing happen, like a 404 or 422, etc. Codeception basically does the same thing, but is a lot more readable. So, let me just do that. Get the what they call a SEST generated. Basically, I think they just took test and said, hey, we're called Codeception. Let's put a C instead of a T, and look at us go. So, just to not beat this over the head, because I know watching people coding is fun for a very finite point in time, and then it gets to not being fun to watch anymore. So I'm going to basically just write one test of the user's endpoint, which is all we're going to be programming this time around. The index of the endpoint, and I might do some cheating because I'm not fully up to, don't really remember all the Codeception stuff off the top of my head, but what's nice is that you can basically write your test exactly like this. Just, they like to use what they call tester guys. So for example, our tester is an API tester, and the functions are named to where basically they usually say that your variable is capital I, so then you can basically write it out in English. I want to get a list of all users. So when the test actually runs, this will be basically the title of the test in the command line output. And then this I send get to /users, and that's just right there. That's all it takes to immediately just hit the API, get a list of all the users, and get the JSON back. And then if you have it set to a JSON, you could set it to where you want it in XML and could check for that accordingly. But instead you can just say IC response is JSON. Simple enough. And IC response contains JSON. For our API, everything's nested under a data key. And then below that, we'll have the array of user objects. So what you could basically say is if you've seeded the database and set the seed for the fake data that gets put in so that you always have the same information, since our IDs are going to be UUIDs that we see on the API side, store basically in this little bootstrap file that's part of the API suite. Inside of this bootstrap, it gets loaded before the actual tests are executed, which basically allows you to create just store variables to have access to in your tests instead of having a giant function that gets fired off in the beginning of the test suite that sets up a bunch of things. They have what's called a fixtures class, and it just has a simple add and get, and it's just add key and then the value. It's almost like a Redis successor almost, or basically, but how I've been doing it is just using these fixtures add, and you can see my cheating comments underneath. And then from here, we have an ID, and it'll be, this isn't actually a UID, but I'm using SQLite for testing, and I don't have a fancy GUI thing to get the information quickly from it. Name, my name, and just say the username is Hunter, because I am one of the first ones to sign up. The perks of starting your own company is you always get the username you want. So then here, not there. Sorry, I get a bit of mouse lag when I AirPlay due to playing with Yosemite, so sometimes I don't see the updates correctly. So this way you can have in the fixtures, inside that bootstrap file, you set up all your fixtures of, for this example, your users. I usually only have one or two bouncing around because that's really the exact amount I need. And they're always seeded in the database because I use Faker for the test to generate the dummy data, but I always set the seed to the Faker so that no matter what, I'm always getting the same information put into the database, just so that I have a better idea of what's going to be there. Another way you could do that is let Faker have a random seed, but then also seed in one or two things manually of basically seeding in the user first name. I know this user last name will be this, however you want to do it, but I usually just set the seed it once, see what it puts in, and then copy the information over for one or two users into this fixture, and then from there on out, you'll go. The only thing that I've noticed you have to be careful with is that even if you set the seed on Faker, if you request a UUID from Faker, every once in a while, it won't seed the same UUID it's supposed to, and it does it randomly. I haven't been able to figure out why yet, but for example, if I seed 10 users 1, 2, 3 will still have the same ID each time I reseed. User 4 will change. 5 stay the same, 6, 7 change, 8, 9, 10 stay the same. So I would kind of seed a couple of times and just watch to see what shows up in your database to make sure the UUIDs aren't changing randomly on you if you're using that as something to test against before you store them, because things might blow up and you'll be like, oh, what's going on? If I find out a better way to do that, then I will absolutely let y'all know, because it's something.
Does code section purge your database after you run your test?
Yes, you can actually. Let me take that back. Yes, asterisk. The class you see at the top here, API tester, is generated by codeception. You don't have to write everything that's inside this API tester because when you configure it in Codeception, you tell it the class name, and then you give it the modules to enable, which is Laravel 4, since we're in a Laravel 4 environment, REST to give us the ability to make the guzzle calls and everything, asserts, just so you can assert things, and then API helper. API helper isn't actually part of Codeception. It's basically a custom module that you just define and support. And you can see I have, unfortunately I can't make this text here bigger, but whenever you first bootstrap or install Codeception, it generates kind of just dummy unit functional acceptance test for you. And then I generated API myself just because I like to keep the name API going everywhere. But all the API helper is literally just a class that extends the Codeception module. But you can do, if I remember let's see. Okay, so if you define this function, you can, through the Laravel 4 module, get the artisan service and then have artisan run your migrate and then seed functions off of artisan, so that then each time your suite runs, it's wiping and clearing everything. So it does, but not out of the box. You have to tell it to.
Out of the box, does it know that you're in a testing database? Is it picking that off of Laravel's environments, or how's it doing that?
I actually just had to solve this. I had that same question when I was using Codeception, and I'm trying to remember. I want to say the answer is yes.
Yeah, I don't remember ever having to do anything special to get it to use the test configs.
I don't either, but I know I was messing around with some of my setup, and I remember looking at the environment stuff, Googling and doing some research about it, but I can't remember if it's out of the box testing or if you have to set the environment manually. So, instead of trying to fumble for an answer.
That's why I came.
Okay. Okay, this is where I would have made the change, if any, which I actually want to copy this over. So I believe it does just out of the box pick up the fact that you are in the testing. Actually, I think that's exactly what the Laravel 4 module does, that's it. The Laravel 4 module is where it happens, because I was digging through and just basically command clicking all throughout PHP Storm to look at the code, and that's when I found it. When the Laravel module gets created and starts up Laravel, it sets the environment to testing manually. So nice and very helpful, so you don't have to do it manually. But I'm just going to copy this code over because I knew I was never going to remember any of that. So here's how you basically get the Laravel 4 module, grab the artisan service, as they call it, and then just via code just call the migrate and then dbc commands. And then, so that way, it will, I think the testing environment automatically does database stuff, but yeah, sets up the database each time, seeds the stuff, and goes. So then you can actually test the deletion and updating of information to make sure that's working. So, it has this, by default when you run Codeception, it doesn't show like all the text. So like this I expect thing won't show up in the command line unless you specify the steps parameter. Then actually each of these I send, I see responses will get put out in some form of text in the command line of each step of each test in the suite.
So you're saying you explicitly have to ask for those?
Yeah, you have to explicitly you have to ask for each step, but by default it'll just immediately say what's in the I want to text, and then the status of it. We can actually do this. Except that fails because you have to include fixtures and when it errors, it will show the steps. So here, our first test ran, and you can see it's failed to get a list of all users in the actual SES, as they call it, and we'll give you a bit of a idea of like the test that failed was I see the response is JSON, and it says couldn't see response is JSON decoding error number 4. And how to look that up if you actually want to know what the exact decoding error is. And then failed asserting that 4 matches expected 0. So I guess what it's doing is it's taking the JSON and doing the decode and just making sure that there were no errors during the decode, which is how that function is working. And then it'll highlight the scenario steps and give you a nice little failures, assertions, or test assertions and failures. Generally you want 0 failures, but TDD always has that fun fact of starting with failing everything and then making it all pass. Excuse me. So, I don't think I actually want to do too much for that, but this is basically the gist of it, where we're just listing, hey, give me all the users. Make sure if I want the response to be JSON, that it is JSON, and then make sure the JSON that I got back actually contains this one user that I know should be part of that list, and goes from there. So let's make that work. I like to program off of a kind of a popular pattern in the Laravel world, which is the repository pattern. So what I've done here is I have a custom namespace that's PSR4 loaded for SUPS, which is the name of our application, which for those of you that weren't here last time, SUPS is basically just a Yo clone because Yo was at the time very popular and I just felt like making fun of it because it's still stupid. But so inside of SUPS is where I load up all my repositories, and from there we'll load them into the Laravel framework using a service provider. This is kind of a preview to how you would do package development in Laravel, and a talk I might give in the near future. But something I noticed, at least for our last job and actually our current job, is if you say have, like for example, we have a users and SUP resources. Both of those will have repositories. I noticed that both of those, and times that by n for how many resources you have, will probably have the same functions over and over and over again in their interface. That being find by ID, basically the CRUD operations. Find by ID, create, update, delete, and I kind of just bundle in find by IDs, find all, the list, which I basically consider part of CRUD now, and then destroy many. Those always are in every single one of my interfaces, and it just gets tiring of, I'm almost just copying and pasting every single time. So I decided to do things a little bit differently and create a entity interface, which has all those functions, along with some extra optional parameters. The with, which is, if you're familiar with Laravel, is how you do the with allows you to do the eager loading and cut down on your queries. So find all, find by ID, and find by IDs so that you can do endpoints like get users ID, comma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Store, update, destroy, and destroy many, just a delete version of that get multiple IDs. So this way now, all my repositories will just implement this entity interface and just done. I just have to write that once, and that was actually quite nice. What I also wound up doing was, since the code for those implementations is basically all the same as well, I made a abstract repository that all the other repositories that implement the entity interface will extend. So protected model, which is just the base Eloquent model, whenever you create it through the service providers, when you'll actually pass in this instance, the user model. Make is just a little helper function to tag the with stuff onto the model whenever you're doing all the other functions. But then from here, we just have a generic find all that gets all the entities and then paginates it. Find by ID, since we're using UUIDs as the IDs, instead of just doing entity find, it's just entity where UUID is equal to the passed in ID and the first instance of it. Find by IDs is basically just a wrapper of the previous function. It just makes a collection on the fly and then calls that find by ID function for each ID and kicks back the collection. And then this find all by function was something I was playing with, where, for example, if we want to search all the users by first name, give me all the users that are John, instead of having to have references to input get username to get the query parameter and then the where clauses, this function is just there, so then you can just do public function find all by name, the value from input get, and then the optional whiffs as well. So this abstract repository and the entity interface are very new to me, as in I just literally played around with using it for the first time now.
What motivated you to do that?
I was just kind of doing some research and seeing, Tom, I think, actually asked me basically the same question of why not use an abstract class, since these are repeating all over the place. And I can't remember what I said at the time, because I think that was, we went out for drinks afterwards, so forgot that. But I kind of just got tired. I noticed I was rewriting the same stuff over and over and over again. Right. And through my research, I saw an example of this, so I decided, no, give it a try. And once I started writing it, I started sitting there, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And I feel like it's going to work a lot better. I think I'll get a better feel for it once I actually start using it, outside of just writing a lot of this code beforehand, so that we weren't here for 5 hours as I wrote through all this. But I think it's a lot more helpful and helps you stick to the don't repeat yourself principles. So what's nice is, albeit it probably is a little bit unnecessary, here we have the user repository, or Eloquent user repository, that extends the abstract repository and then implements that entity interface and the user interface. At the moment, the user interface is just that one function, which is to get the subs for the user. Soon I'll be adding friends and devices to get their mobile devices and who they're friends with to this interface, but just for this example, I was just the one function interface, which seems unnecessary, but it's a better practice. But so for the Eloquent user repository, just setting the model equal to whatever model gets passed and when it gets constructed. and that model property is on the abstract repository. I'm going to come back to why I overrode find by ID in a minute. But some basic implementations of excuse me, those functions. We have destroy and destroy many, just using the find by ID function and then calling the delete eloquent function off of it and kicking back that boolean. Though more times than not, really don't ever use that boolean it kicks back. The only reason, really, there's only one way you can use it. If it's true, yay, kick back a response. If it's false, then you can throw some sort of failed to delete the entity exception. Destroy many. I don't like this, but I also haven't thought of the best way to do this, besides some fun logic. Calls destroy on all the IDs, but I've wondered, like, if you pass in 3 IDs for something, say you're doing like a to-do list app and they check multiple items to be deleted off the list, instead of calling delete ID 3 times, you could make a little like helper, like basically be helpful to the developer and allow them to pass all 3 of those IDs comma separated to the endpoint, cut down on network traffic. But my current implementation, which is something I'm playing with, more or less, even if one of those fails, will kick back true. This isn't a problem if the user, in this case, a user isn't found, because since we're using the this find by ID, kicks back a not found exception if the user doesn't exist. But if, for whatever reason, first user deletes, second user doesn't, third one does, all anyone's going to know is that, hey, it succeeded, because I'm just kicking back true. And I've thought about doing some way where I store basically each boolean that I get back from looping through the array and just and the previous one and the new version together. Because if they all succeed, it'll be true, and if one fails, it's false. But I haven't found out a way to basically say, hey, one of those 3 is false, and here's the one that's not gonna, you can't delete it or won't delete for whatever reason, retry for this one later. So, looking for tips or pointers on that one, but that's definitely something I'll be, if I find a solution to in the next month, we'll bring up next meetup. And then sups, that one little user interface function, grab the user and kick back either the paginated list of all the users receive the sups, or if they pass in a query parameter that like sent, instead of getting the received ones, you want to see all the ones the user sent, then I'll kick back the sups sent and paginated as well. Now the reason why, excuse me, I overrode the find by ID is that usually when I had each blank interface, like user interface, subs interface, all had these find by ID, find all, etc., and I didn't have the abstract class of the implementations. How I usually did it was just this model find, or this model where UUID equals ID first. Store that in a variable, and then if not that variable, didn't find anything, throw a not found exception with the message where that resource not found. With the abstract implementation, excuse me, at the moment with the abstract implementation, I could still do that same method, but instead of being able to say like user or sup or friend not found, it would just always be entity not found. So I'm kind of playing at the moment of what's more important, actually saying what the entity is that's not found, so user not found, or if I can relatively expect the developer or whoever's looking at the API to figure out that, okay, they try to request a user that doesn't exist at the endpoint, the user's ID. I think they understand that when I say entity not found, I mean the user's not found. Or finding some way to magically inject what the resource is into that message. But so at the moment, I kind of just played with overriding the abstract implementation, which this is basically how you would do it. It's just parent static call defined by ID, pass in the parameters, take what it's stored, or take what it returns, which at the moment is just going to be either the entity found it or null or false, and then just do the check there. And then if it was not found, throw the exception. If it is, then just return. And basically, functions the same way as the abstract one. I just added in the 4 lines for that if statement and the throw the exception. So,
But what would happen if you did on this model? If you did like was it get class?
That
Would it show the interface, or?
if I do a get class of this, it would be the Eloquent user repository. But if you're saying off the model,
This model, yeah. Because if it's hitting the user model, then it would say user not found. If that's the class name you're going with for the model.
that actually would work. That's exactly how that would work. And since we're having fun here, let's go ahead and see if we can break things or make them work, one of the two. So if we excuse me. Do this. Easy, so copy paste, which, as we all know as developers, is a great idea that never bites us in the butt later. Copy and pasting. But so based off Terry's suggestion, this solves exactly my problem to where, and I'm just using sprintf because I like using those helper functions, but now instead of having this right here, we should still get the same effect. User not found, subs not found, whatever not found. That should work.
Okay. Is it working?
I haven't actually tied in the.
Oh, okay.
I'm about to do that next. Which
Now I'm curious.
I am too. So let's go ahead and do it. So let's go ahead and make the subs service provider, which the more and more I say subs, the word just sounds weirder and weirder, probably as it is, but hooray. And unfortunately I haven't memorized this yet, so I'm using my handy dandy tool dash to look up the docs on how to structure the service provider. But apparently that's not correct. Alright, I'm gonna cheat another way and just bring up the other project I was working on. But the service provider is pretty much exactly like all the other service providers for the various packages you see, and even Laravel's own service providers. And these are just what's under that fancy providers config option in app.config. So instead of this, basically allows you to do one of the first ways I saw doing this was in the routes file, call the app bind, and then that's where you would bind the the actual repository implementation to the interface, which was great and all until you had like 10 of those plus all your route declarations in the route file, and then it just got ugly fast. So that's where the service writer comes in handy. You do all the logic in this one class, and then that's it. Just slap it onto the providers list, and away you go. Register. So we go ahead and bind subs repo v1 user
Very nice. This is all Zen style, man. Creating service providers.
and then come on, catch up. And then oh my god, I know how to spell autoload. Come on, fingers. So while it's doing that, so you see I already have a custom service provider from Dingo API, which is a nice package that helps API development, but we just have to add our own. Excuse me. And if I typed everything correctly, this should now work. Let me clear some of these out of here real quick. Alright, so this controller should look familiar to anybody who was at the meetup last month. Very nice and well-developed controller right there. But so now
Is that logic in your controller? How dare you?
I know. So now instead of having logic in the controller, or all the business logic in a controller, or however you want to phrase that, it's in the repository. So more or less the controller is just going, hey repository, give me this information so that I can then kick it back out to the router. Okay, bye, thanks repository. Which is nice and handy. So for the index, all we do is I just caught myself before I threw an exception. The downside of doing the whole controller thing, or the constructor and the controller, is if you're using the Dingo package, and extend off of its controller, excuse me, it will explode because you have to manually pretty much say, oh yeah, totally, this is part of the controller, even though all you're doing is just passing it along to the base controllers constructor. Though I think he's been talking about getting away from that. Unfortunately, he's fallen off the face of the earth for almost a month now on Dingo development, which is unfortunate. So, if we do this, let's get over users with this. And cross our fingers and nope, exception. What happened? Postman, why do you do this to me?
Which is just that lag.
I know what's wrong with it, and it's because since I wanted to play with Yosemite because I like to play with new things.
That's the
Just
perfect
broken.
thing to do in your development books.
Yeah, probably not the best idea, but I like to have a challenge. Also, member function, find all in an object. Okay, so that's null. We've now hit the debugging part of our program. Yep. So this is the fun part of programming, as we're all very well aware, is the what the heck went wrong and why portion of everything. So, hey, who's this? I think what happened here though is that artisan dump autoload doesn't always do the exact same thing as composer dump autoload.
I couldn't get Artisan to dump the cache the other day, and that's irritating.
I think I might be sharing your irritation pretty soon. Good here. Oh. Is that why? No, that's not why. Darn. It's finding the service provider, because if it didn't, Artisan would fail. I apologize for this. I made the worst assumption ever that the same thing you've done always would work always. Because the second you make that assumption,
Wait a second, you copy
doesn't.
and pasted, you made the biggest mistake ever.
Nah. Yeah. Where's the term?
Nope. Users controller. What's the users controller, and you call it as a user controller?
Is that what's happening? I don't think that's it. It's making the route and it's hitting the function. It's just for whatever reason the actual interface that should be the repository is coming in as null. So now we bring you the portion of Laravel development called DD driven development.
What's the index? The find all in your index? Your find all in your index, echo, or var dump your user and see what your user is.
Yeah, I was trying to catch it on the controller to see what it was sending in, and now I'm misclicking everything. Stop it.
Everything's crashing.
Now this is the portion where everything crashes. No, that's because I opened up Chrome, which unfortunately I have like 3,000 tabs open. So at the moment my laptop's trying to handle the 3,000 processes that are getting started by Chrome. And you'd think a very high-dollar machine from Apple would handle that, but I think every machine I've used Chrome on, by the time I open up all my usual amount of tabs, it just starts to crumble and suffer.
Yeah, I'm not. What's their graphics processor? Is that great either? Nothing.
No, just told me exactly what I knew, but for some reason I was expecting the user's controller constructor to fire and give me the DD output that I put there, but it didn't.
Your user interface namespace is right? Your user interface namespace is right?
God damn it.
Oh no.
It'll be fun. I'll let it sit for a while. User interface, users, yep.
Subsweep v1.
Yep. It's supposed to be an eloquent user repository. Service provider knows that app bind of that. Subs service provider in the subs namespace, which is inside of the provider's list of subs service provider. Which leads me to believe Let me try this. Using app make. I'm going to manually request instance of that. And dump diet and see if the service provider is even binding it properly, which could be the case is that the service provider isn't binding properly, which means the IOC container has no idea how to get what it's looking for, so instead it just kicks back a null. So that's not the case, because there it is right there. Awesome. So, for the interest of not watching me flail over what the heck's going on here, see if that works, and if that doesn't, then I know it's for whatever reason the... Oh!
Yes.
Construct is not a word that PHP understands.
Apparently PHP Storm thinks it's a valid function name, so.
Yeah, because it thinks it's a valid function name because it doesn't know that I'm trying to do a construct. It just thinks I'm making a function by the name of construct. Well, that was fun.
The good news is we all missed that.
Yeah.
So we're all fired.
Still fail.
Of course, we fix one problem and solve find another, but we're all painfully aware of that's how programming goes too. Oh, okay, that was my mistake.
Namespace.
No, with part of Dingo API uses another package called Fractal, which is what this user transformer is made from.
Gross.
When you do the with paginator, all this response thing is using fractals built-in stuff to generate the responses, but whenever Fractal's not made for Laravel specific, so when you're passing in something to the with paginator stuff, you have to send in a instance of the paginator adapter, and not just the pagination class object that we got back from our repository. And what's the error this time? Nope, not there. Okay, this one might be because I'm really smart and totally seeded the database beforehand. Okay. Forget the pagination. Today's not my day with users is now kicking back as null. Nope. But, no fractal transformer, so it's not exactly how the response would kick back, but here's a list of users. Let's grab our first one.
What was the fractal transformer gonna get rid of?
It's when you go through the whole like fractal thing, all this array of users gets embedded under a data key,
Yeah.
and then the pagination information would be under a meta pagination object in the JSON, just in case you had other metadata like debug information. And then the fractal transformer also changes. At the moment, for this example, it only changed like 2 field names, but it was just a way to not just dump out exactly what was in the database format. So long and lat was going to be just longitude and latitude. But since fractal is not cooperating, we're just going to go with the direct output.
Issues with fractals on it as well.
This is actually the first time I had issues, and I think this is just a very classic case of live coding and the fun things that can happen with it. I debated on how much I was going to go into with the fancy, helpful tools, and I'm quickly learning that my initial idea was the incorrect idea. I should have just gone with the least amount of fancy tools possible. So, excuse me, here, the ID works. Make a change to it to an ID that hopefully doesn't exist unless I got really lucky. It didn't. We get an exception, and the only reason we're seeing the whoops there was an error exception is because I have app debug enabled at the moment. So we're getting the 404 not found. And if we check the Laravel
Guzzle and it throws an exception.
Hmm?
Using Guzzle and it throws an exception.
Yeah, since I'm using, see, here's the message. So yeah, Terry's idea did in fact work because we have the not found exception with message, user not found instead of some other generic entity. And you can actually see where the exception got thrown from the abstract repository. So all that work, and we found out that Terry's idea did in fact work. Yeah,
Bravo.
good job, Terry. So, trying to think of what else. We have testing, we have the repository pattern. I'm going to show you the transformers, even though they're not working at the moment, and next time they will. But Fractal basically main purpose is to, with these transformers, and get you to move away from just dumping out whatever your model to array gives you and hoping you have like things like the password field set to hidden correctly. So, and it's also helpful because if you're, say, revamping like a legacy application, their database column names may be just super unhelpful or unnecessarily long and full of things like blah undercase blah underscore blah. If that's supposed to mean first name, then using the fractal transformer, all you do is define the class, in this case the user transformer, extend the transformer abstract, and then add in the transform function. You don't have to specify, like type hint what's going into the function, but I like to do that just in case somebody accidentally tries to use the user transformer with a sup in this example. That way it'll at least immediately blow up in whoever's developing its face saying, hey, you tried to pass a sup into the user transformer, don't do that. And then you're literally just returning an array of the keys and then the values. This includes subs thing. What it allows you to do based on the available includes is embedded responses. So it's not gonna work because it's being temperamental, but if I made that same request to that user / long UUID with the query parameter include equals subs, whenever it transformed the user, you would also say, oh hey, he also wants the subs included, and in the response you would have subs data, so that it's namespaced in case you have pagination inside of that embedded resource or other metadata, and then under that subs data would be all the subs for that user, and that's what this excuse me, the function include subs does, is it just facilitates that process and tells it what transformer to use. So in this instance, hey, give me the subs along with the user, instead of me having to make 2 requests to user's ID and user's ID subs. And it gets just transformed like this. So for example, instead of just saying like who sent the sub, I'm just having user underscore ID and having a documentation somewhere. And oh, by the way, don't forget the user underscore ID for that JSON is always who the sender was. Instead of just doing that, I actually like to do like a sender object and then with all the information. So in this example, I just did ID, username, and name because I just wanted to have more than 2 fields there. So I just picked username as a random, but you could have a bunch of other information, like if you're doing say if you're doing like a LinkedIn clone or something like what our Basanti's API was doing. Most of those objects would have like their ID so that you could route to it to the API and the mobile apps. Their name, obviously, and then their like occupation field, like workstat does so-and-so at this company, and then where they, well, I really said that wrong, does so-and-so. And then where they're located, so Austin, Texas, Bermuda Triangle, whatever. And that's more or less a style choice on mine. But as you see, I don't have any includes for subs transformer just because I couldn't really think of one for it. Unless the only one that I could think of doing is if you want to get a list of subs and then all the people that received it embedded into the response, I could include that. But I just didn't deem it necessary for this little example app. So I definitely recommend, if not Fractal, which is one of the PHP Lead's fancy packages, whatever you're more comfortable with. I just wouldn't recommend doing a just direct DB dump basically into your APIs, because that, if you're not careful, could lead to some very bad things, like accidentally kicking back the passwords. Whether, hopefully they're hashed. I mean, even if they're hashed, it's still a bad thing, because we all know if someone's bound and determined to get your information, they will spend time to unhash it. But yeah, heaven forbid you DB dump your data into the API, and well, this whole time you had unencrypted plain text passwords. Oops, we've seen a few people do that. LinkedIn. So I think I'm gonna call it here before I run into more unexpected errors and fumble around a little bit. I'm thinking of next time, I think I'm gonna go ahead and finish up my little API talks series, and then just, this code's gonna be up on GitHub, which I'll post a link to, and if you'll ever have questions, besides hitting up on Twitter or even emailing me, contact me through the Meetup site. If you look at this code as an example for projects you work on, which would one make me feel pretty cool, or pretty good and cool. But if you have questions about it, then you can obviously submit issues on the GitHub repository. Ask like, hey, how do I do this? Or why are you doing it this way? Or even, you're doing it this way and you're wrong, here's how you should be doing it. That's the whole point of even putting this thing on GitHub in the first place, is that I'd like y'all to be able to use that as an example, inspiration, whatever, as well as maybe I'll even get some feedback from y'all. The whole teacher become the student reversal. But I think next month I'm going to finish up with the, I'm gonna code outside of this, the rest of the user's endpoint, and get all the stuff that exploded on me actually working again. I'm gonna show the example of the having like a sub resource for the users pointing to the non-user's controller So basically, by the end of next month's meetup, we'll have the API fully functioning, giving us a list of users, and being able to look at an individual's subs that they sent or received. And from there, I'll call it, and probably outside of the meetup after that, I'll add on some more stuff, kind of just finish up the other endpoints that I had in mind, just to have it as complete as possible, just so they have a better inspiration to look at, just because it always drives me crazy when I look at other people's code for like, oh, how are they doing this, and half of what you're looking for is there, but then the other half just never is there, and you're like, okay, that's half helpful, I had no idea how to do this, or how I should do this, and as we all know, IRC isn't always that helpful, especially not the Laravel chat room anymore. But
Then we just need some seed funding.
yeah.
Things around.
But yeah, after that, that'll be pretty much it. If you have any questions after that meetup, then I'll be available for Twitter. But now, if you have any questions or concerns or compliments or praise, lay them on me.
Good job.
Thank you. Apologize for the errors. That was unexpected.
Seeing someone else struggle with debug is nice.
Yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. Is that yeah, it kind of sucks that everything didn't go flawlessly, but at the same time, in the real world, it rarely ever does.
It's the best I've ever seen, even for big names, it happens. Even worse,
Yep.
because they never come out of it. I've seen presentations like that and just totally with that.
Oh yeah, I'll at least
This
take
one
pride.
actually came out.
Yeah, I take pride in the fact that I can.
Problem debug, problem fixed.
Yeah, it's one thing to run into a problem and just kind of throw it around. It's like, oh, guess I'm done. But I'll take a little bit of pride from being able to actually fix the issue on the fly. But
So you said I know you said this, but I just need to clarify.
no, go ahead.
My brain was probably elsewhere. You said you were posting this on GitHub.
Yes, I am. I thought about putting it under the Austin PHP thing, but at the moment it's under my personal account. And if you look at the previous meetups, last meetup, I know I linked it. I am going to post a comment on this meetup on the meetup.com site and link, to the repo as well as my Twitter, all that. And you'll be able to get my email off of GitHub, so if you want to email me a question that's longer than 140 characters, that's general API stuff, and feel free to do so.